After the Amazon, the Nile is the longest river in the world.
There would be no Egypt without the Nile River flowing through from the south down to the Mediterranean, where it opens up in the delta.
For decades, Egypt's Nile Delta was choking. Its lakes clogged, its channels dying. Then came the dredgers. They carved through the mud, reopened ancient waterways, and set the delta's heart beating again. But when scientists tested the water flowing north, what they found wasn't just unexpected. It rewrote what we thought we knew about the river itself.
We think of the Nile as unchanging, but in fact, this river has evolved a huge amount over Egypt's history and even before that.
How Egypt dug life back into the delta. For decades, the beating heart of Egypt's Nile Delta was slowly suffocating. Lake Manzala, once the country's largest coastal lake, was fading into a swamp. On the delta's northeastern edge, just west of Port Said, its waters grew still and lifeless. Reeds covered the surface, illegal fish pens sliced it apart, and the channel that once tied it to the Mediterranean had nearly closed. Boats that used to glide through open water now scraped the bottom or got tangled in weeds. That was the picture not long ago, until everything changed. Over the last few years, Egypt launched a dredging project on a scale few thought possible. It wasn't just a cleanup, it was a resurrection. The work was part of a national effort that began in 2017 to save the northern lakes, 4 vast lagoons that guard the delta's edge. But Lake Manzala was the centerpiece. Between 2021 and 2023, the dredgers arrived in full force, cutting channels, clearing reeds, and opening paths that had been blocked for a generation. From above, it looked like surgery on a giant patient. Long pipes floated across the surface, connecting to powerful machines that chewed into the lake bed and pumped a slurry of mud and water to the shore. The mixture fanned out into wide settling ponds where the water drained away and the mud dried into mounds of new earth. Cutter-suction dredgers from the Suez Canal Authority and their Gulf partners worked side by side, following routes planned years earlier. It was the same precision the canal uses to stay open for world shipping, now aimed at saving a dying lake. By the time the work was in full swing, crews had moved close to 100 million cubic meters of silt, enough to fill thousands of stadiums. Every scoop of mud pulled from the bottom gave the lake back a little more depth, a little more life. And when you add it all up, the difference was dramatic. Lake Manzala's water-holding capacity jumped by more than 500,000 acre-feet. That means billions of cubic feet of new space for water to flow instead of stagnating. But the dredging wasn't just about digging deeper. It was about reconnecting what had been severed. Over the years, thousands of unlicensed fish farms had walled off sections of the lake. Wooden fences and earthen barriers divided it into private rectangles that trapped waste and blocked circulation. During the dredging campaign, those fences were ripped out. The lake was reopened, literally stitched back together. The difference was visible almost immediately. What used to look like a patchwork of green islands and brown sludge turned blue again as water began to move freely. You could see it even from a small boat. Where fishermen once fought their way through thickets of reeds, they could now glide through open channels that stretched from the southern edge of the lake all the way to the El Gamil inlets on the Mediterranean. The dredgers had given the water its pathways back, and the water responded. To understand why the government poured so much effort into this one lake, you have to zoom out to the bigger picture. Egypt is re-engineering its water system from the ground up. With a growing population and a limited share of the Nile, the country needs every drop to count. Just east of the delta, the Bahr el Bakar water treatment plant, now the largest of its kind in the world, pumps out nearly 1.5 billion gallons of treated water every single day. That water flows north toward new farmland and the coast, but it can only move if the channels, drains, and lakes are open. Lake Manzala is one of those outlets. If it's blocked, the entire system backs up. So reopening it wasn't optional, it was essential. The crews worked in layers. First, they cleared the narrowest corridors so survey boats could enter. Then, heavier dredgers followed, carving wide arteries through the center of the lake. Each pass deepened the basin, freeing the trapped water beneath the weeds. As the dredgers moved north, they reached the sea inlets, those shallow gateways that link the lake to the Mediterranean. Over time, sand and silt had built up there, choking the flow. By deepening both the inlets and the channels that feed them, engineers gave the system a new rhythm. Fresh seawater could now push in and out, flushing the lake the way it was meant to. Every dredging operation leaves a trail, and you could see Manzalas from space. Satellite maps comparing 2016 to 2022 show the difference clearly. The open water area expanded, and the lake's average depth increased across nearly every zone. The patterns of color on those maps tell the story better than numbers ever could. The blues spread where the greens once dominated. To picture how much material was moved, imagine a line of dump trucks stretching from Los Angeles to Las Vegas, each one filled to the brim with mud. That's the scale of earth the dredgers removed. And the payoff wasn't just beauty or navigation, it was capacity. More depth means more room for water to move, which reduces flooding during storms and gives the delta an extra buffer against rising seas. The project also changed daily life around the lake. The network of new channels brought back the small patrol boats that monitor fishing grounds and water quality. With the illegal enclosures gone, enforcement teams could finally cross the lake again instead of being stuck in local pockets. That mobility matters. It means rules can be applied fairly, and the water can be protected in ways that were impossible when the lake was a maze of fences. Everywhere you go now, you can see signs of a system that's breathing again. The wind cuts ripples across wide, open surfaces instead of dying in reed beds. The smell of stagnant water has faded. And the horizon, once broken by poles and nets, now runs clear from end to end. By 2023, when the last dredgers wrapped up their work, Lake Manzala looked like a different place. Its surface area had grown to more than 570 square kilometers. Clearing those channels was supposed to be a fresh start. But what scientists saw in the water after the dredging told a very different story. The hidden side of the cleanup. After the dredgers left Lake Manzala, scientists went back to see what had changed. They didn't guess or rely on drone photos. They tested the water itself. 2 surveys, one from 2015 and one from 2022, compared the lake before the dredging and after it. They focused on 3 simple clues: the clarity of the water, its salt level, and how much oxygen it could hold. Together, those 3 things act like the pulse, temperature, and blood pressure of a lake. When they move in the right direction, it means the system is coming back to life. To measure clarity, researchers used a simple round plate, painted half black and half white. They lower it into the water and note how deep it goes before vanishing from sight. In 2015, it disappeared quickly. In 2022, it sank deeper before fading from view. That means the water was holding less mud, less waste, and fewer floating particles than before. It was literally more see-through. Next, there was a rise in salinity, the saltiness of the water. This came from the same reason the lake got clearer. When the dredgers reopened the inlets toward the sea, They allowed more exchange between saltwater and fresh water. In the old days, when the channels were blocked by silt and weeds, seawater barely reached the lake's core. Now, with the inlets deep and wide, tides could push farther in, mixing with the fresh water that flows down from the delta. That's why scientists saw the biggest jump in salinity right in the northern zone, closest to the Mediterranean. The last piece, oxygen, was the most important. Without it, fish suffocate, algae rot, and life dies off. In 2022, researchers found oxygen levels rising sharply in the same zones where water movement had improved. The top readings came from the northern sections, right where the new flow met the sea. More mixing meant fresher water, less decay, and a stronger food chain. Those changes didn't happen by accident. When water starts moving freely instead of sitting still, sunlight penetrates deeper, waste gets diluted, and gases like oxygen can circulate. The same study showed that by 2022, parts of Manzala that were once murky and stagnant had started acting more like a living estuary again, a meeting point between river and sea. You could see the effects under a microscope, too. The scientists didn't just measure chemistry, they counted life. In 2015, they cataloged 43 types of zooplankton, the tiny drifting animals that feed small fish and filter the water. By 2022, the list had dropped to 31 species, but the mix had changed. More salt-loving creatures were showing up, especially toward the center of the lake. That meant the sea's influence was spreading inward. The community of life was shifting, adapting to a system that now pulsed with salt instead of being sealed off by sludge. Some things dropped too, but that was a good sign. Two key pollution markers, called biochemical oxygen demand and chemical oxygen demand, both fell after the dredging. Those mouthfuls basically mean this: how much oxygen the water loses as it breaks down waste and chemicals. When those numbers fall, it means the water is cleaner and less clogged with rot. In 2022, they were down significantly, especially in the north and middle zones, the very same places that had seen the most clearing and the most connection to the sea. It all lines up: more flow, more oxygen, less waste, and clearer water. For most scientists, that's the dream result. But nature rarely gives one-sided victories. In 2024, another study took a closer look at the fish people actually eat from Lake Manzala, and what they found added a warning. Even after the dredging, the flesh of many fish still carried high levels of heavy metals like mercury, lead, arsenic, and cadmium. Some samples even showed increases compared to before. These metals don't dissolve or vanish. They hide in the mud, sometimes for decades, binding to fine grains at the bottom. When the dredgers came in and stirred up that mud, some of those metals likely got shaken loose into the water, then reabsorbed by fish as the lake resettled. It's a process scientists call resuspension, but you can think of it like shaking a dusty carpet. The dirt doesn't disappear. It just floats for a while before settling again. That's why the researchers urge the government not to stop monitoring now that the dredging is done. The cleanup gave the lake back its movement, but it also reminded everyone that old pollution doesn't forget. This isn't a Manzala-only problem. It's something dredging projects face all over the world. When you dig into the bottom of an old, polluted lake, you risk stirring up what's been buried. If that sediment carries heavy metals or industrial waste from decades of runoff, it can cloud the water again and move contaminants into the food chain. That's why modern dredging projects are often staged carefully, cutting one zone at a time, pausing to let the water clear, and monitoring the mud for metals as they go. There are tools to keep those plumes under control. Some crews use silt curtains, which are long fabric walls that hang down in the water to trap muddy clouds close to the dredging area. Others use bubble screens, which send up fine streams of air that form a soft barrier to slow the spread of stirred-up sediment. These don't make the work clean, but they make it manageable. Then there's another layer that's easy to miss: plastic. Microplastics, tiny shards from bottles, bags, and synthetic fabrics, have become one of the quietest and most stubborn threats to the Nile Delta. They're too small to see, but they're everywhere. Floating in the water, buried in the mud, even inside the fish. In 2022, scientists called the Delta's estuaries one of the Mediterranean's hot spots for microplastic pollution. Some areas held thousands of plastic particles in a single cubic yard of water. That's what makes Lake Manzala's new openness both a blessing and a challenge. When the inlets were blocked, plastic couldn't travel far. Now that the lake is breathing freely again, exchanging more water with the sea, those same currents can carry tiny pieces of plastic in both directions. Without stronger waste control upstream, dredging can unintentionally turn the lake into a faster highway for pollution. It's not a reason to close the lake, it's a reason to manage it. Another team looked at fish catches during the dredging years to see how the ecosystem was coping in real time. They recorded nearly 8,000 individual fish across 29 species and found that the community kept changing with the seasons and with the work. Some species moved out temporarily when the noise and mud peaked. Others took their place. Across the broader northern lakes, the long-term data shows something consistent. When conditions improve, when water moves, clarity rises, and oxygen levels stabilize, the fish catches follow. But when dredging or pollution spikes unsettle the balance, catches dip. And when you look at the chemistry side, the nutrients, the ammonia, the phosphates, the trend is the same. In the areas that now feel the sea's pulse, those levels dropped. Not because less fertilizer was flowing in, but because the water could finally move enough to dilute and flush it. In other words, better plumbing led to better chemistry. That restored current doesn't stop at the lake's edge. It pushes straight into the Mediterranean, where Egypt faces a far harsher challenge: holding the very land the river built. The battle to keep Egypt's coast from sinking. Stand on the northern edge of Egypt, where the land finally meets the Mediterranean, and you'll see that the shore isn't made of cliffs or rocks. It's soft, it's a thin, sandy rim, built over thousands of years by the Nile River's endless gift of silt and sand. That fragile rim is what separates the fertile delta from the sea. But for decades, it's been slipping away. Scientists tracking the coast say the losses are staggering. The Rosetta arm of the delta has been retreating by roughly 100 to nearly 200 feet a year. The Damietta arm, a little farther east, has been sliding back by around 30 to 80 feet annually, depending on where you measure. That might sound abstract until you picture this. Every few months, another row of palm trees falls into the surf. Every few years, a village loses another slice of its edge. And if nothing changes, those trend lines point straight into the 20s and 30s and 20s and 40s. With more land gone, more people displaced, and the delta's outline redrawn again by the sea. At Ras El Bar, the town sitting right where the Damietta branch empties into the Mediterranean, the story is written in sand. Since the 1980s, researchers have mapped how the beach shifts in response to every new structure and every major storm. You can trace where a seawall or a breakwater protected one stretch, only to steal sand from the next one down the coast. It's like squeezing a balloon. You push here, it bulges there. The coast has fallen out of balance. Then came the unexpected. On February 6, 2023, the massive earthquakes that hit Turkey and Syria sent a small tsunami rolling across the eastern Mediterranean. It wasn't a wall of water, just a quick, powerful pulse, but when it reached Egypt's coast, it shoved an already weak shoreline even further inland. The old answer to that kind of erosion was simple. Build walls, stack rock, pour concrete, block the waves. But hard defenses only buy time. They protect one place while starving another. That's why Egypt is now shifting to a different playbook, one built on sand, not stone. In October 2024, Egypt signed a major agreement with the Netherlands, the world's expert in living with the sea. The deal lays out a plan to map every major sand body sitting offshore, from the Nile Delta, essentially to find and catalog the sand reserves buried under the seabed. These aren't just piles of sediment. They're the raw material to rebuild the beaches themselves. The Dutch have mastered this approach for decades. Their coastline isn't held back by concrete walls. It's constantly replenished with new sand dredged from offshore. They call it nourishment. You feed the beach, the waves shape it naturally. And when it starts to fade, you feed it again. Egypt is adopting that same logic. The partnership is focused on what's called the Drowned Delta Shelf, the part of the ancient Nile Delta that lies underwater now. Those layers of buried sand are like a savings account. If engineers can locate clean, coarse, wave-resistant grains, they can use them again and again to rebuild the coastline. The plan isn't a one-time rescue. It's a long-term cycle of replenishment. But that cycle only works if the details are right. Not all sand behaves the same. Fine grains get swept away by the first strong wave. Coarse grains build a beach that looks unnatural and reflects waves instead of absorbing them. The trick is to find material that matches what nature originally put there. That's what this new survey will determine: grain size, purity, depth, and volume. So engineers know exactly where to dig and how much to take without causing new problems. Location matters just as much. Offshore borrow sites, the underwater spots where sand is extracted, must be close enough to be economical, but far enough not to disturb natural bars or ecosystems that help break waves. You also need clean material that won't cloud the water for weeks or harm marine life. The new survey aims to turn old assumptions into real data. Instead of guessing, Egypt will know exactly which offshore areas can safely feed the coast. At the same time, Egypt is upgrading the very infrastructure that depends on this coastline. Its ports, and none is growing faster than Damietta. The port is being transformed into one of the largest shipping gateways in the region. Backed by international financiers like the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the International Finance Corporation, and others, a $500 million expansion is underway. It includes a massive new container terminal with quay walls nearly a mile long and deep berths close to 60 feet down. When complete, it will handle millions of cargo boxes each year, putting Damietta on more global trade maps than ever before. That's the good news. The challenge is that deeper channels don't just let in bigger ships. They can also rob nearby beaches. When dredgers cut the seabed to deepen access lanes, they often trap sand that would normally drift along shore, starving the coast beside the port. It's an invisible chain reaction. That's why coastal engineers now treat ports and beaches as part of the same system. If you cut sand out, you must put sand back in. Ideally, right where waves can carry it naturally along the shoreline again. Egypt is beginning to apply that logic too. When Damietta's channel is deepened, the dredged sand can become nourishment material for nearby beaches instead of being dumped offshore. It's a rare win-win. Ships get deeper lanes, and the coast gets fresh protection from erosion. And it's already paying off. Shipping lines have started to notice. COSCO's regional network, known as Diamond Line, recently shifted its routes to include Damietta on its regular loop between the Adriatic, Greece, and the Eastern Mediterranean. Hapag-Lloyd followed suit, adding Damietta to its schedules. These changes might seem small, but in global trade, they signal confidence. Carriers only add ports when the water's deep enough and the facilities are ready. The challenge now is to make sure those new trade routes don't come at the expense of the coast that supports them. Yet there's one more hidden boundary offshore, one that has nothing to do with waves or ships. It's the seafloor itself and the history buried beneath it. Just west of Damietta lies Abu Kirbe, home to two ancient cities that sank centuries ago, Thonis Heracleion and Canopus. These were once thriving ports of the pharaohs, complete with temples, statues, and trading docks. Around 2,500 years ago, earthquakes and rising seas caused the ground to liquefy and the cities to vanish beneath the waves. Archaeologists have been rediscovering them piece by piece. In 2023, a joint Egyptian-French mission announced new finds at Thonis Heracleion, a temple dedicated to Amun, a sanctuary to Aphrodite, ritual objects made of bronze and gold, and well-preserved wooden structures buried under layers of silt. The discoveries were detailed, photographed, and documented. They prove that the seabed off Egypt's coast isn't just sand, it's a time capsule. And that's why dredging and sand borrowing must avoid these zones completely. The new sand mapping agreement with the Netherlands accounts for this. Before any extraction happens, teams will use sonar, ground-penetrating radar, and core sampling to locate both good sand and no-go zones. These will include archaeological areas, shipwreck fields, and sensitive ecosystems. Each chosen site will have a recovery plan, so that after sand is removed, the hole can refill naturally instead of becoming a permanent pit that changes local waves. It's a modern balance between coastal engineering and heritage protection. But protecting the delta isn't just about the sea. It's also about what happens upstream, inside the delta's own veins. You can't keep the coast healthy if the river branches that feed it are clogged with silt. Take the Rosetta Branch, for example. A detailed study found that over roughly 20 years, it had accumulated about 12.5 million cubic meters of sediment. That's more than 16 million cubic yards, enough to fill 6,000 Olympic swimming pools. Because of that buildup, the branch lost about a quarter of its flow capacity. In plain terms, it could carry 25% less water than it was designed to handle. Researchers ran simulations showing that if dredging and bank restoration were done strategically, targeting the worst silted zones, the branch's flow capacity could increase by about 2/3. Flood-prone land could shrink by 1/3. Those are massive gains from maintenance alone, not from building new dams or canals. It's proof that keeping old arteries clean can do more for flood safety than many expensive mega-projects. But sediment isn't the only problem. Human construction has narrowed parts of the river. Over the years, unlicensed building and landfilling have squeezed the banks inward, turning wide channels into narrow bottlenecks. Water piles up behind these choke points and spills sideways into streets and fields. Dredging the riverbed helps, but it doesn't fix the flow if the banks remain pinched. So Egypt's cleanup campaigns now focus on both, cutting the bottom and clearing the edges. The importance of this became painfully clear in early October 2025, when heavy flooding hit parts of northern Egypt. Water surged through districts like Ashmun, forcing evacuations. The government blamed Ethiopia's new Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, accusing it of releasing too much water too fast. Ethiopia responded that the opposite was true, that the dam actually held back water and reduced downstream flooding. But for people standing knee-deep in water, the real question was simpler. Were their local branches and drains clear enough to carry the flood when it arrived? And while Egypt manages floodwater, it's also transforming how it uses it. West of Egypt's traditional Nile Delta, a massive new project is reshaping the desert. It's called the New Delta, and it's one of the biggest farming plans in the country's history. Just 6 years ago, satellite images showed nothing but endless beige sand. Now, in those same images, you can see green circles and rectangles stretching across the landscape. Each one a farm field made possible by canals, pumps, and a whole lot of engineering. That water doesn't come from nowhere. It's pulled from the Nile through new channels that divert flow away from the river's old branches. In mid-2025, reports confirmed that a brand new city named Jirian, built alongside the new Delta farms, would receive around 10 million cubic meters of Nile water every day. That's about 2.5 billion gallons, enough to fill more than 4,000 Olympic swimming pools, flowing through the pipes daily. Redirecting that much water changes how the entire Nile system behaves. When you move that kind of volume to one side, some of the river's older branches end up carrying less water, while others suddenly face more pressure during floods. It's like replumbing an entire country. If the system isn't balanced, one pipe bursts while another runs dry. So if planners don't adapt their flood control work to this new flow pattern, they'll be fighting the river as it used to be, not as it is now. Think of the Nile Delta as a single living web, every part connected to every other. The coast, the ports, the river branches, the drains, and the new inland farms all affect one another whether anyone plans for it or not. If engineers dig a deeper port channel, it changes how sand moves along the shore. If they dredge a river branch, it alters how fast floodwaters reach the sea. And if they pull millions of gallons a day toward desert farmland, it shifts the water pressure inside the whole delta. That's why coordination isn't optional, it's survival. The smartest approach is timing and teamwork. When the port at Damietta is deepened, the same sand that's dredged out can be used to rebuild eroding beaches nearby, instead of dumping it offshore. When crews clear a river branch to prepare for flood season, they can do it early enough that the extra flow reaches the coast cleanly, without spilling into towns and fields. It's all one system. Each piece either supports or sabotages the other. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.